The year is 1492 DR, where our story begins in the Western Heartlands, in a realm known as Eltergard, or the Kingdom of the Two Suns. Eltergard is a theocracy of the deity Torm, and its capital city, Elturel, is a powerful centre for agriculture and trade in the region, renowned for its paladin knighthood, the Order of the Companion, and its fierce mounted warriors, the Hell Riders. Elturel was, until a moment ago, situated atop a steep hill, with its cliff overlooking the River Kyanthar, which runs from beyond the reaching woods in the east, towards the Sword Coast in the west. Above the city hovered an impossible sight. Like a second sun, a brilliant orb known as the Companion produced no heat, but illuminated the city day and night, and could be seen from the furthest reaches of Eltergard. The miracle of the Companion brought all kinds of pilgrims and devotees, and although the ruler of Elturel, the High Observer Flavius Krieg, took credit for summoning it, none besides he truly understood where it came from or what its purpose really was. But now all of that has changed. Each of you is in the area for a different reason, but none of you are inside the city itself at this moment. If you had been, wouldn't be here to take part in this tale. Nothing could have prepared you for what was to come. You're some distance from Elturel, looking towards it, and before your eyes, the Companion, that great shining orb above, erupts with an arc of lightning, shaking the city and the river with a crack of deafening thunder. A few more times it licks the metropolis with electricity, and then it fades from a brilliant gold to a dark, impenetrable black. Immediately, the city is plunged into darkness, even though it's the middle of the day, and then the air itself seems to warp around you, and the ground begins to tremble, and then suddenly, woof, the entire city of Elturel disappears, the Companion along with it, blasting the region with heat and energy and setting fire to everything that surrounded it. Forced backwards onto the ground, you climb back up as the light returns to see that only a crater remains in the hill where Elturel stood. And as the ringing in your ears diminishes, you begin to hear shouts and screams of panic. Everyone in the city has vanished, but those Elturians who'd been further out remain as witness, their homes on fire, their friends and families simply gone into the unknown. You stumble around for some time trying to get your bearings, and you come eventually upon a collection of wagons where a few bruised and confused individuals are gathering. You begin to make your way towards them, not knowing what else to do. And this is where you meet one another. In the story so far, you were on the outskirts of Elturel when you witnessed it blink out of existence. As you struggled to grapple with what had happened, you met one another and united to tackle the situation. Several of you are from the area, though you never crossed paths until now. And you also met a young girl named Dara who believes she's destined to help as many survivors as possible by guiding them to safety in the nearby city of Baldur's Gate. Although only a crater remains where Elturel stood, the buildings on the outskirts of the city were left behind. Many of them were set on fire by the sheer power and force of the event, and the flames are spreading rapidly. The place is ripe for pillaging, and bandits prey openly on the weak, while strange creatures have been seen roaming the countryside, so the refugees dare not idle long. But they do need supplies for their journey, like weapons and food, so in their desperation they ask you to help them by leading as many survivors to the caravan as possible and gathering provisions. They suggested you search 3 locations far enough out that they likely remain. And so you went first to the smithy, where you met the blacksmith Wellham and his assistant Gordrick, who was a regular at Gennaro's rage room, now missing along with the rest of the city. The blacksmith's wares had been stolen by bandits, but a half-elf woman named Volus, who'd also been preyed upon, was able to tell you where those bandits had gone. So you found them in the hills, and learned they were members of a cult who worshipped someone called Zariel, before defeating them and recovering the blacksmith's possessions. You also found a note there which suggested that the disappearance of Elturel may have been brought about at the behest of someone in Baldur's Gate. To learn more, Alina tortured one of the cultists, breaking his fingers, while Kenway smashed his genitals with a Konobo. Finally, the man offered up some cryptic words before passing into delirium. Something about looting valuables and weapons for the dead 3, whoever they are. After that, you went to the trading post and met its proprietor, Ibn, and her assistant, Paul. They lent you their key so that you could help them carry their goods to the caravan. They also asked you to rescue a historian named Billiam, who lived nearby. When you found the historian, however, he just kept insisting on going to pick up an empty book he'd ordered. He said he wanted to chronicle the ordeal and asked you to help him fetch the book. Instead, Kenway struck him on the head and then gave his unconscious body to some passers-by, who agreed to take him to the refugee caravan after he threatened them. You were also asked to go to the fabled Fawn Inn to see if there are patrons surviving there, but first you returned to the trading post, where you collected everything you could find, including the sign itself from out the front. And that about brings us to now. In the story so far, you witnessed the city of Elturel blink out of existence, and you came together to help a caravan of around 30 or so refugees escape with their lives. Along the way, you found evidence that someone from Baldur's Gate may have been involved in Elturel's disappearance, and that cultists worshipping someone called Zariel are collecting loot for the Dead Three, the demigods of tyranny, murder, and bones. Although you have reason to believe Baldur's Gate may be in danger of suffering the same fate as Elturel, there seemed to be no better destination for the refugees. You also rescued a Hellrider named Rhea Mantlemorn, who was intent on going to Baldur's Gate because of some rumors she'd heard. Those rumors suggested the High Overseer of Elturel, Thavius Krieg, may have gone to Baldur's Gate shortly before the whole ordeal started. She found that troubling since her understanding was that the Grand Duke of Baldur's Gate, Ulder Ravengard, had just arrived in Elturel to meet Thavius Krieg only hours before the place disappeared. Sworn to protect Elturel and to serve the Overseer, she was determined to seek him out, to learn what had happened, and to serve and protect him as she's bound to. So Ethel suggested Rhea ride ahead to scout for danger, and to return to warn the caravan if there was any. After that, one of the members of the caravan, a half-elf woman named Volus, revealed herself to be a cultist, probably a worshipper of Baal, the god of murder. She killed another refugee after he overheard her sending a message to someone in Baldur's Gate using a sending stone. She called that someone Master and seemed glad to report that Elturel was gone. Unfortunately for her, you managed to work out who she was and kill her in combat. Kenway was so eager to fight, in fact, that he ran into battle with only half his clothes on. And afterwards you profited quite a bit from all the loot that Volus had apparently stolen from Elturel before she left, and that brings us about to now. In the story so far, after witnessing the city of Elturel disappear and leading a caravan of survivors in search of haven, you arrived at Baldur's Gate to find the city barred to outsiders. By the Basilisk Gate, Captain Zodge of the Flaming Fist told you they were being overrun by refugees and that they weren't letting anyone else in. He also told you he'd arrested Rhea Mantlemorn for accusing Baldur's Gate of being responsible for Elturel's disappearance, and for causing panic by spreading rumors that the gate might vanish next. Despite this, Captain Zodge admitted the Flaming Fist are overwhelmed. He said he was looking to hire additional hands. Baldur's Gate's been plagued by murder sprees committed by Dead Three cultists, the same cultists you already suspected of having something to do with the disappearance of Elturel. The city's also been dealing with a strange new drug known as Sunshine, which is affecting the citizenry of all classes. So in return for access and the promise of handsome rewards, you agreed to find a way to stop these murder sprees and make a major drug bust. Captain Zodge gave you official copper badges and sent you to see an informant named Terina, aka Teresa, who Marker was able to find at Elsong Tavern using one of his maps. While you were speaking to her, and while Gennaro was indulging his gambling addiction, the tavern was overrun by pirates led by an acquaintance of Kensei Kenway's, a man named Deadeye who claimed he had news for Kensei that his old mentor, Ronan Kenway, was looking for him. Deadeye offered to provide more information if the party would step aside and let him kill Terina, who had wronged him somehow. But despite Jean Lamour's plea for diplomacy, Kensei decided to kill first and ask questions later, while Ethel nonchalantly murdered Deadeye's lackeys from behind her book on the couch. Afterwards, Kensei recovered a receipt for mooring fees from Deadeye's corpse, which included the location of his ship, the Uncivil Serpent, in the docks. Terina thanked you for protecting her and told you to see a mob boss named Nine Fingers Keen at the Blushing Mermaid for more information about the Dead Three cultists. Before leaving, Alina also learned from a junkie named Yerkin that Sunshine can be bought from street dealers at the Maiden Statue in Brampton, and Ethel was invited to have her fortune read by a soothsayer named Rahima at Sybil's Palace. At the Blushing Mermaid, Nine Fingers Keen said she had information about the dead 3 cultists but would only convey it to you if you took out some drug dealers first. These dealers, associates of the Revelers Union, were selling sunshine in an alley out the back of Jopelin's tea house and interfering with Keen's business there. So Alina, Jean Lemore and Kenzay pretended to be junkies to get close to the dealers and take them by surprise. Unfortunately, your cover was blown when Alina tried to flirt with their leader, Tobias, and matters were made worse when Marka forgot the safe word and Ethel's cat was killed. Still, in the end, Tobias was unable to protect his Nabo from being crushed by a Kanabo. Jean Lemore delivered some truly cutting insults, and Alina took Tobias's hand as proof of his demise. Tobias's last surviving henchman was also tied up and taken captive, and for some reason, Ethel decided to start collecting scimitars. And that about brings us to now. In the story so far, you began your search for the dead 3 cultists and sunshine dealers by taking out a street gang for a local mob boss named Nine Fingers Keen. After killing these dealers in a back alley, Jean Lemore and Kenzay interrogated their last surviving member and learned they were getting their sunshine from a tiefling they referred to as the Cold Man, presumably because they once saw him kill another dealer with frost magic. Although you managed to find the Cold Man's meeting room at the Blushing Mermaid, where he'd apparently given the single name Patience at the reception desk, and was known for bringing customers in with Hessian sacks over their heads, the room was empty except for a mysterious scrap of paper that Jean Lemore found under a table. And perhaps all you really learned was that Kenzay can't be trusted with money. Nine Fingers Keen was happy with your work, despite Alina defacing the drug dealer's hand and turning it into a necklace. She told you of a bathhouse near Elfsong Tavern where her spies say there may be dead 3 cultists hiding, perhaps using an underground complex as their base of operations, since there seems to be too much foot traffic for such a modest building. Spending the night at Elfsong Tavern, Alina had a disturbing dream. Gennaro broke even at the tables, and Marka enjoyed a mysterious shellshine. And then screams from the street rudely interrupted what would otherwise have been a veritable breakfast of champions. The culprits, dead 3 cultists murdering innocents in the streets. You chased them down, juggling antipasto platters, bacon and cookies, and then Marka transformed into a direwolf for the first time and nearly got banished from the city for being taller than a peacock. Afterwards, you headed for Deadeye's ship, the Uncivil Serpent, in Brampton, either to steal it or to find more information on Ronan Kenway's whereabouts. But you stopped first at Sybil's palace, where Rahima the soothsayer aired everyone's dirty laundry and made everything super awkward. Rahima did at least give most of the party inspiration, and also gifted Ethel a magic tarot deck, which got off to a promising start by providing her with 1 minute's worth of mosquito repellent. And that about brings us to now. In the story so far, you had an awkward encounter at Captain Deadeye's ship, the Uncivil Serpent, which wasn't quite as abandoned as you'd expected, and was instead full of pirates beginning to worry about their missing captain. Thinking quickly, you were still able to convince them to tell you where to find Ronan Kenway's ship, the Malenti, by promising them you'd keep a dead eye out for Deadeye, hopefully buying some time before they ask around and learn it was you who killed him after all. And luckily, no one noticed Kenzay was wearing Deadeye's hat and jewelry either, including the DM. After that, you made a quick detour to visit Marka's old friend Paige, who was unironically impressed by his map of Elturel, and was especially kind towards Ethel. Marka purchased a magic map case he'd always coveted, and then some of you headed to Sorceress Sundries, where Rivelin Blackhand sold Ethel some provisions, but struck too hard a bargain for Jean Lemore, who sought revenge by letting a magic frog loose in his shop. Meanwhile, Gennaro and Marka were getting stick and pokes at Pleasure and Pain Tattoo by some gnomes from South Katashaka, who had the standard accents associated with that region, and helped Gennaro express his patriotism towards Elturel by giving him a tattoo of the middle stanza the Elfsong Tavern Ghost had sung about the missing city when you first arrived. Marka also had some work done, demonstrating his affection for his comrades by getting some tats on his shell grid, a flaming book for Ethel, and a set of daggers for Alina, while others remain unfinished. Gennaro's tattoo would have taken much longer, but he used his tinkering abilities to rig up an advanced tattoo gun using some broken timepiece components and Marka's sling, and gained the love and respect of the stick and poke gnomes by entrusting them with the patent for it. When the party reunited, Ethel had been pounding tea all day at Jopelin's and had to be cut off so that she was sober when you went to Brampton to see Ronan Kenway at the Malenti. The black-furred Leonin captain was decidedly not sober, but just seemed to want to waste everyone's time, being melancholic and nostalgic. Later it turned out that Ronan's wife and child were kidnapped by the Cold Man, who's been using them to force Ronan to locate Kensei for him for reasons that remain a mystery. So you agreed to team up against the Cold Man, who said he'd return in 2 days and suggested Ronan tell the mysterious sunshine-peddling tiefling that Kensei is staying at the Blushing Mermaid, so you can ambush him there in the basement. Making reservations at the Mermaid for said ambush, Alina convinced the receptionist to buy a new brand of hair grease for his comb-over, and Nine Fingers Keen agreed to lend 3 of her soldiers to the ambush effort on the morrow. Before going to bed, you went to scope out the bathhouse where the dead 3 are rumoured to be hiding. There, Jean Lamour enjoyed a nice bath for a reasonable price of 2 silver pieces, and Alina had a massage for an also very reasonable price of 3 silver pieces. But more importantly, everyone acted totally inconspicuously, and so one of the masseuses ultimately confessed to you that she was concerned about a possible connection between the activities of her boss, Mortlock Van Thamper, and the dead 3 murders in the city. She and her co-workers fear Mortlock may be running some kind of shady business behind the bathhouse owner's back, since they've seen him leading cloak-wearing cultist types in through a secret door there after hours. And that about brings us to now. In the story so far, you discovered that the cultists of the Dead 3 were operating out of a bathhouse in Eastway, and that Sunshine was being sold to mid-level drug dealers by a tiefling spellcaster known as the Cold Man. Although you managed to find the Cold Man's meeting room at the Blushing Mermaid, where he'd apparently given the name Patience at the reception desk, the chamber was empty except for a mysterious scrap of paper you found under a table there. It seemed like a dead end, until you learned that the Cold Man had kidnapped the wife and daughter of a Leonin pirate named Ronan Kenway, to blackmail him into locating Kensei, for whom Ronan had once been foster father. The Cold Man warned Ronan he'd return soon and that he expected to be told Kensei's location or else he'd murder Ronan's family. So you suggested to Ronan that he tell the Cold Man that Kensei is staying at the Blushing Mermaid in order that you can ambush him there. While waiting for that to happen, you decided to pursue your other lead and investigate the dungeon below the bathhouse. You went through a secret door in the back and descended into an abandoned and polluted section of the city's water supply network. There you battled the cultists of Bane, Baal, and Merkel, while Gennaro privately tested the Sunshine drug and discovered it gave him several benefits, but then left him feeling sick and unwell. After what felt almost like weeks, you finally came across the manager of the bathhouse, a hulking beast of a man named Mortlock Van Thamper, who was in the midst of a battle with an assassin named Vars, and may have been killed had you not intervened. In return for protection, Mortlock told you he'd been employed by his brother Amric to set the Dead 3 cultists up in the dungeon, and that it was Amric who was responsible for the effort to recruit them. According to Mortlock, Amric was paying the Dead 3 with treasure stolen by devils from Tiamat's lair in the Nine Hells, and had intended to add to that payment what his servants looted from Elturel before you stopped them. Mortlock said Amric hoped the Dead 3 murder sprees would prove the Flaming Fist can't do its job, causing them to fall out of favor with the people and the Patriarchs so they lose funding, weaken, and possibly even disband or leave Baldur's Gate altogether. Mortlock said he didn't know exactly why Amric wants the Fist out of the way, claiming that his brother doesn't respect him enough to tell him anything. He believes Amric sent Vars to kill him simply because he always hated him and has no need for him anymore. Hoping you'd avenge him and take Amric out instead, Mortlock told you his brother runs a money-lending business out of a dockside tavern called the Low Lantern, but then subsequently agreed to go with you anyway, in part due to the cuteness of Ethel's cat. So you killed Vars and left the dungeon with Mortlock in tow. But when you returned to the surface, you encountered a half-dragon cultist named Ultis and his crew of Tiamat worshippers. They claim to have been sent by someone called Arkan the Cruel to retrieve the treasure that Mortlock said his brother had been using to pay the Dead 3 cultists. Ultis revealed that the treasure had been stolen by agents of Zariel, the same entity worshipped by the mysterious Master in Baldur's Gate, whom Volus Foot had been communicating with via the Sending Stone. Apparently Tiamat was guiding Ultis to the location of the treasure by sending him visions, and since you've taken the treasure from the dungeon, they can sense you're in possession of it. So much so in fact that Ultis was already disrobing in preparation for combat before you even came around the corner. Now he plans to kill you for Tiamat's treasure, along with everything else you own. And so, let's roll for initiative. In the story so far, you emerge from the dungeon of the Dead Three victorious, and with Tiamat's treasure in your possession to boot. In dire need of sleep, you found yourselves waylaid by the half-dragon cultist Ultus and his cronies. But after a dangerous combat in which Alina was nearly electrocuted to death by lightning breath, she bounced back with a vengeance and put a rapier through his brains while he was held helpless in Bear Marker's claws. Ready to collapse, you put aside the fact that the bathhouse manager, Mortlock Van Thamper, had been in charge of murderers and torturers and took him along with you to the Blushing Mermaid where you lay down for a lovely afternoon nap. Later that evening, Gennaro resisted the lure of sunshine, and Jean Lemore taught Clancy the Friendly Skeleton to put on a physical comedy show at the pub, which few fully appreciated besides Freddy, thug on loan from Nine Fingers Keen. Meanwhile, Ethel took notes while everyone tried to get their heads around Alina's transformation into the likeness of her drow sister. Also, you were warned by Fulton from Elfsong Tavern that the pirates of the Uncivil Serpent are looking for you, and Kensei explained that he grows bigger at will and doesn't need pills in order to do that. In the morning, one of the Cold Man's imps came and told you the gig was up, since they'd been spying on the Malenti and knew of your plans. The imp invited you to the Cold Man's warehouse for a chat, threatening to kill Kensei's old mentor Ronan and his wife and child if you didn't show up. Leaving Mortlock behind, you went to find out what the Cold Man had to say. But after discovering Yundo, one of the Malenti's cabin boys, dead by imp stinger in the gutter along the way, Kensei didn't really feel like talking. Nevertheless, at the warehouse, after repeatedly insulting Marker by referring to him as livestock, the Cold Man insisted on delivering a villain's monologue, explaining that his real identity is Kindness Rodihara, Kensei's brother, and that his purpose in tracking Kensei down was only to invite him to damn his soul. How? By killing all of his friends with his own free will, of course, and joining his brother in his quest for power. Somehow that quest involves the Sunshine Drug and helping someone or something called Bell set free another person or entity called Levistus. But as I mentioned, Kensei didn't feel much like talking, so he grew enormous without the use of pills as promised, and attacked. You seemed hopelessly outnumbered, but at the last moment the crew of the Malenti crashed down from the sky roofs above and evened the odds. In response, Kindness fled the room and disappeared through a portal. Most of the pirates died. Ethel cast rapid-fire magic missiles, only to get blood-vommed. Ronan got free and swiped at the air with a greatsword, and Gennaro fell asleep. But the most important thing that happened was that Freddy died bravely in battle. His last request being that Jean Lemore write a song to immortalize him. And that about brings us to now. Alright, in the story so far, you rescued Ronan Kenway from the Cold Man and his imps, and after thanking you for saving his wife and daughter, he told you he was considering retiring to Cholt to live with them in peace. When they were gone, you gave the warehouse a thorough search and found a crate of sunshine which apparently hadn't been sold yet, and a list of distributors. You also found a scrap of paper which matched the scrap Jean Lemore found at the Blushing Mermaid. Putting them together revealed that Kindness was involved in some kind of operation to do with turtles. This seemed to send Marker spiraling into emotional turmoil, of which he credited the Cold Man's particularly malicious words. It didn't appear to comfort him much that, according to Kensei, his older brother may harbor resentment towards Testudines because of an event in his early childhood in which a snapping turtle bit him on the penis. Nailing the lid back on the crate to prevent Gennaro from stealing the sunshine, you left the warehouse, but not before Marker set the building ablaze. A plume of smoke billowed into the sky as you walked calmly away, but Jean Lemore did carry Freddy's body out to make sure he received a proper burial. Although ultimately, when you gave him to some fists and paid them a huge bribe to take care of his body, you still couldn't be sure they weren't just gonna feed him to rats at the Shrine of Suffering. Nevertheless, you moved on to see Captain Zodge at the Sea Tower of Baldurin, Alina risking arrest yet again by using magic to inflict minor mischiefs on Flaming Fist guards. Luckily, nothing serious came of it, so you made it to Zodge and gave him the sunshine and a list of distributors. He was impressed and paid you for the drug bust, but let you keep the deputy badges since you said you still have work to do in ridding the city of cultists. If a 10-day passes without any more cultist murders, he'll pay you the rest of the reward money. But at that moment, it was time to go shopping,
So you sold most of your treasure at the bank and purchased a bunch of useful magic items at Sorcerer's Sundries, Ethel displaying her dubious haggling skills in the process. Then you headed back to the Blushing Mermaid to attune to things and take a short rest. While there, Jean Lemore, Ethel and Marker informed Nine Fingers Keen about the death of Freddie, Percival and Edward. She was greatly displeased, but appreciated your respect and the fact that you said that you put on a tribute show for them, not to mention the poster marker design for the event, which touched Jean Lemore deeply. After resting, you went to the Low Lantern in Greydock to investigate Mortlock's claim that his brother Amric was the one who'd commanded him to recruit the dead three cultists. But when you made your way down to the second deck, you encountered Rhea Mantlemorn, who said she'd escaped the Flaming Fist and had actually come to the tavern for the same reason. Amric, she explained, is the son of a powerful woman named Duke Thalamra Van Thampa, one of the Council of Four, and, according to rumours, Thavius Krieg, the High Overseer of Elturel, was spotted recently in the Upper City in the company of some private guards in Duke Van Thampa's employ. Unable to get into the upper City due to being a fugitive, and uncertain whether Krieg is the Duke's guest or prisoner, Rhea came to speak with Thalamra's son Amric, yet discovered he has a spine devil for a pet. This gave her pause since she recalled the cultist letter from Elturel, signed with a Z, or a Z, which she'd identified as a symbol of someone called Zariel, who she referred to as the Archduke of Avernus. So she decided to hang back and watch him for a while instead. And apparently while she watched, she saw a messenger deliver a magic-looking tetrahedral stone to Amric, which he's been staring at for some time, stroking his moustache in thought. Not wanting to reveal her identity to everyone in the tavern, she suggested she guard the exit while you approach Amric to investigate further. And that about brings us to now. In the story so far, after the Cold Man fled through a teleportation circle in his warehouse, you began searching for the recruiters of the dead three cultists, believing they may have something to do with the disappearance of Elturel. Mortlock claimed his brother Amric was in charge, so you went to see Amric at the Low Lantern Tavern in Grey Harbour. There you were reunited with Rhea Mantlemorn, who told you that Amric and Mortlock are sons of one Duke Thalamra Van Thampa, whose private guards were spotted escorting Thavius Krieg somewhere in the Upper City. Questioning Amric under the pretense of being a fellow cultist, and with the rest of the party causing a distraction, or at least rambling about library classification systems, Jean Lemore discovered that Amric doesn't even worship the Dead Three, but instead worships Zariel, the Archduke of Avernus. Zariel's symbol, an infernal Z, was used to sign the letter commanding the Dead Three cultists in Elturel, further supporting the idea that Amric might be in charge. But Amric denied any knowledge of such things, and when asked whether he knew the whereabouts of Thavius Krieg, he said he'd never even heard of the High Overseer. A shrewd liar, perhaps, but he did at least blame his older brother, Thirstwell, for trying to have Mortlock killed, and also slipped up by mentioning that the sending stone connected to the one you found on Volus was brought to him by his mother Thalamra for investigation. Unable to get anything else out of him, you took him hostage and left him tied up in your quarters at the Blushing Mermaid with Mortlock to watch over him. Then Ethel transformed into the likeness of Amric, allowing the party to pass into the Upper City unhindered. And with this advantage you talked your way into Van Thampa Villa, avoiding conflict with the guards outside. But while Ethel attempted to hide her old lady voice by pretending to be sick, and Marker shielded her from physical touch to preserve the illusion, Alina gave up the game by threatening an innocent and defenseless young maid, possibly aged somewhere between 12 and 20, who, incidentally, volunteers at the local soup kitchen, babysits orphans, and supports her sick parents on a meager servant's wages. Unfortunately, the party was being watched by invisible imps, who promptly attacked, attracting several more devils from another room and some house guards from upstairs. Things got so stressful that Gennaro took some more sunshine on the sly. But even though Kenze was having an off day and couldn't seem to canabo the way he usually canabos, you still managed to turn what was originally meant to be mere entering into breaking and entering, and murdering. You slayed your assailants, and then learned from the terrified maid that there may be a cellar downstairs which can be accessed via the kitchen. Before checking that out though, Rhea insisted on railroading the storyline by saying she wanted to speak to Thirstwell. So you headed upstairs, where there were two remaining guards who promptly died of a stroke. And it was at that moment that Jean Lemore realized he'd left Clancy, the friendly skeleton, outside at the front gate, along with Ethel's cat actually, who was unwittingly dismissed and recalled from a pocket dimension into the house and is now invisible, waiting at the end of the hall in case a door opens. And so, we now return to Vanthampa Villa. In the story so far, after witnessing the disappearance of Elturel, you came to Baldur's Gate to save a group of survivors and search for those responsible. Believing the perpetrators to be worshippers of the Dead Three, you soon learned the Flaming Fist were being overwhelmed by cultists from the same group, and accepted deputization so that you could access the city and hunt them down. Captain Zodge of the Flaming Fist also asked you to investigate the influx of a new drug known as Sunshine, which, as it turned out, was being brought into Baldur's Gate by Kenzei's brother, Kindness Rodihara, aka the Cold Man. After tracking the Cold Man down to a warehouse in the lower city, Kenzei rejected his offer of allegiance to the archdevils Levistus and Bel, and instead you killed his imps and forced him to flee, burning the place down and taking the remaining drugs to Zodge for a reward. Then you worked your way up through the ranks of Dead Three cultists until you discovered they were actually being employed by members of a different cult again, worshippers of Zariel, the Archduke of Avernus in the Nine Hells. At the head of this higher cult was another duke, Thalamra Van Thampa, one of the city's Council of Four. After killing her in her home in the upper city, along with Zariel's barbed devil emissary, you learned Thalamra was allied with Thavius Krieg, the High Overseer of Elturel. She and Thavius were attempting to use a sentient shield known as the Shield of the Hidden Lord to influence the Patriarchs somehow and make her the sole ruler of Baldur's Gate, giving her the right to commit it to Zariel in the same way as it turns out Thavius had with Elturel. Long ago, Thavius signed a contract with Zariel condemning it to the Hells, and your new companion, Fallister Fisk, believes that contract may be contained within the magic puzzle box you found in Krieg's quarters. Fallister wants to take this box to his master in Candlekeep, Silvira Savicus, an expert on the Nine Hells who wants to see if she can use it to save Elturel, or at least to prevent other cities in Faerun from suffering the same fate. After that, you fought your way out of Vanthampa Villa and fled, Alina tripping over an old lady you rescued to cover your escape. And now you're back in the lower city, waking up from a much-needed long rest at the Blushing Mermaid. And that about brings us to now. It's Tarsark 5, 1492 DR, 4 days after the full moon, and the city of Elturel has been pulled into Avernus, the first layer of the Nine Hells. 16 days ago you left Elturel for Baldur's Gate, and now you've been well rewarded for your efforts there, ridding the city of the Dead Three cultists, the Sunshine drug, and the Vanthampa Krieg corruption. You set off south along the coast way towards the Friendly Arm Inn and Candlekeep beyond, a huge stash of wine in your bag of holding which Kenzei refused to part with, and some extra gold which Jean Lemore made by selling rugs to Snurp in the upper city and masks to Urko in Little Kalimshan. You remember a pimply messenger showing you around, and how Ethel picked up an old gold dwarf jeweler named Dunkel Ornix at the bank, who was no doubt waiting for her return with growing disappointment. And you noticed as you left that the dearth of sunshine was leading to the deaths of many a junkie in the street, unable to pass their con saves thanks to the kind efforts of you and your companions. For the journey south, Commander Portier gifted you a wagon and some horses, and so you travel now with Clancy the friendly skeleton walking near to the side, and Gennaro either walking on foot several paces behind or curled up, sweating in the back of the wagon, as he seems to have been taken by some kind of illness which the rest of you cannot explain. Marker convinced Fallister Fisk to stick with the party in case devils assail him, for he carries an otherworldly puzzle box to his master, Silvira Savicus, which you found under the Vanthampa Villa. Fisk believes the box may contain Thavius Krieg's contract with Zariel, and could provide more information about Zariel's plans, or perhaps even be reversed. Finally, out of the city, Marker, being a druid, relishes the opportunity to reconnect with nature and the moon, and reflects that he's closer than he's ever been on his personal quest. He pushes for the group to detour west to the Cloakwood Peninsula, where it seems Kenzei's brother, the Cold Man, may be farming turtles for some terrible purpose yet uncovered. Along the way, Jean Lemore plays songs of love dedicated to Mary Bell, his beloved, lost with Elturel, while Kenzei converses with the Shield of the Hidden Lord, growing ever more eager to cash in on its promises of power. In Ethel's tiny hut, which looks like a sort of illusory library on the inside, Alina has a rather long dream about a giant spider, and looking out over the crater of Elturel, mourning her own passing. And that about brings us to now. In the story so far, Marka discovered a letter in the study of Thalamra Van Thampa, sent to her by a dwarf cultist named Exekla Ko, who she'd assigned to kill Kenzei's brother, Kindness Rodihara, aka the Cold Man. After Alina was reunited with her sister Lenari at the Friendly Arm Inn, you left Rhea, Fallister, and Clancy behind to look after Gennaro, who was extremely sick and seemed to be having some kind of physical reaction to something. You tracked Exekla to the Cloakwood Peninsula, and there you convinced him it was safe to explain the situation to you. So he revealed that the Cold Man's been farming turtles for their eggs and sending those eggs to the 9 hells of Bartor, where they're being combined with magic to create the highly addictive substance known as Sunshine or Devil's Yoke, among other names. This substance appears to have been designed to commit souls to the service of the Archdevil Bel, and Exekla told you that Zariel sees it as a direct attempt to usurp her authority by stealing souls from the cities of Faerun before she can draw them into Avernus for herself. In the letter, Exekla had informed Thalamra that he'd located one of the Cold Man's turtle farms on the beach of the Cloakwood Peninsula. After speaking with the turtles in the farm, which he refers to as a compound, he'd learned the Cold Man visits periodically to check on the operation, which is being run by a local orc clan now sworn to serve him and his patron, Levistus, who seems to be in league with Bel. Knowing the Cold Man would visit, Exekla had lain in wait, and then followed Kindness to his lair in the Cloakwood. After locating the lair, he'd returned to the Friendly Arm Inn to send the letter to Thalamra, including with it a map on which he'd drawn 3 landmarks and an arrow, indicating he was waiting for reinforcements at a mushroom-shaped rock. When Marka saw this map, he instantly recognized the landmarks as being the same as the 3 objects he'd sketched out as a child, trying to record where he'd lived before being sent away, probably, it now seems, to protect him from egg poachers. He'd been unable to recall the meaning of these images until seeing them drawn more accurately on Exekla's map. Now in their midst on the beach, Exekla had no interest in the fates of the turtles at the compound, since his only order from Thalamra was to kill Kindness. He mentioned there's to be a culling of senescent turtles at the compound later tonight, but with Marka out of earshot, the party misunderstood, thinking the culling was to occur at the Cold Man's lair in the Cloakwood instead, and departing in haste to stop it. Along the way, you were ambushed by giant spiders, and Exekla himself was eaten, leaving you stranded in the middle of the forest without a guide. And that about brings us to now. In the story so far, after finding the Cold Man's lair in some caves hidden in the Cloakwood, Kenzei and Marka attempted to gain entry by pretending to be captor and captive. Unfortunately, the caves were guarded by mountain orcs who couldn't speak common, so the gambit was lost in translation. At least, it drew several of them out into the open before the battle began, whereafter Alina put the last of their guard drake pets to sleep, and Ethel wept tears of sorrow, for she found those drakes inexplicably cute. Further in, you were attacked by imps, but prevailed with the help of Lenari Silvermoon, even though Jean Lemore was so tired from the journey that he fell asleep twice. It seems the imps were guarding a crossroads of sorts, where an ancient portal to Avernus was reactivated recently, and is likely being used to transport turtle eggs to Bartor before they're returned in the form of Devil's Yoke, and sent via teleportation circles to various cities across Faerun. As you searched the area, Gennaro showed up with Clancy the friendly skeleton in tow, having followed directions sent to him by Ethel using the sending stones. Altogether again, you found a wooden door in the back of the caves, and at the stroke of midnight, Kenzei kicked it open with so much force it broke part of the wall down with it. The Cold Man and his crew were waiting within, having been alerted by the Shatter Spell. His gold dragonborn apprentice was prepared to counter the fireball Kenzei cast using the shield of the Hidden Lord, and an orc cult leader, apparently obsessed with boobs, attacked with surprising agility. Yet nothing could have prepared your foes for JL's deadly field of water-spraying flowers, and even though Kindness taunted Kenzei the entire time and killed Clancy with hailstones, may his bones finally rest in peace, you succeeded in forcing your way into the room, where you came face to face with the Cold Man's naked junkie girlfriend, Belazara, who burst out of the bedroom screaming and foaming at the mouth, yellow-veined with one eye shining gold, and swinging a massive greatsword. Still, that didn't stop Kenzei from unleashing a full load onto his brother, before Gennaro vortex warped the cold man into a sort of bully circle, and the last thing he saw before he died was Marker snapping at him as a means of triggering the traumatic memory of the turtle that bit him on the cock when he was a child. At the moment of his death, the party was surprised by the brilliant appearance of the deity Torm, who stripped Kenzei of his runic powers and forced the cold man's soul into his brother's service instead, as punishment for his evil deeds, and as protest against what he called the breaking of the decree of Primus. Torm spoke of Zariel's theft of Elturel, and said he was appealing to this Primus character on the basis that the Creed Resolute was invalid since the Alturians had been unaware of its implications when signing it. He's been forbidden from interceding any further, but encouraged the party to continue on their mission to find a way to save the city, or at least delay its downfall until Primus delivers his verdict. After Torm disappeared, you spent the night in the cold man's room enjoying his ensuite, and Marker found an abalone wand that had been stolen from his people, probably throughout their enslavement. In the morning you returned through the Cloakwood, where JL hypnotic patterned some orc messengers likely sent to investigate the cold man's failure to initiate the feast at the Tortle farm, and then after a brief fray with Sawagan raiders on the beach where Marker made fish fingers with the help of his bears B1 and B2, cooked to perfection with a fireball from Gennaro, you finally located the Tortle compound and began to form a plan. And that about brings us to now. Chapter 2. With both the Van Thampas of Baldur's Gate and the Cold Man defeated, and the Tortles of the Cloakwood Peninsula liberated, you continue south along the coastway towards Candlekeep. The road is often little more than a dirt trail leading through fields and grasses, and it's easy to forget that it's the same road you set out on from Baldur's Gate several days ago, especially for those being rocked to sleep by the continuous swaying and lurching of the wagon. I'm looking at you, Jean Lemore.
Oh.
The words of the great deity Torm, the loyal fury, echo in your mind as you come to terms with the task that lies ahead, and Rhea has lots of questions about everything you witnessed. As you travel, you discuss the departure of Gennaro, and Lenari asks Selena about the years she spent in Elturel working as a tailor before purchasing a new shop on behalf of their father there. You still have another 2 or 3 nights before you, but Marker uses his magic map case successfully to speed up the journey significantly. Unfortunately, you are hindered somewhat by the weather, which was warm and clear when you set out, but worsens along the way.